Hey folks, I'm Gene Del Sala, president of Audioholics, and
Hugo Rivera, Vice President of Marketing. Gene, we have some exciting stuff today.
we do. We have a very special video here today, Hugo. We have an interview with a legend in the industry of music, at least when it comes to prog rock and multi-channel mixing. I was fortunate enough to get Mr. Steve Wilson, the former frontrunner of Porcupine Tree,
Yeah.
on the phone right before he was doing a gig in Sweden.
That's amazing, dude.
Yeah.
It's incredible that he made the time to go ahead and talk to us, and it was a very interesting conversation.
It was, and I asked him, I didn't ask him the run-of-the-mill questions that the rest of the press do. I focused mostly on multi-channel audio and the mixing process because that's our audience.
Exactly.
Okay, and we're audioholics. So why don't we play the little interview here? And guys, please forgive the sound quality. It's done over a phone. It's not going to be high def audio here.
It isn't. but the information is super high quality.
It is. So I'm going to let you guys take a listen, and then we're going to come back and reflect on all the comments that were made in the video, or in the phone interview, I should say. We have both my brother, Steve Della Sala, who is an avid musician himself, and we have Mr. Steve Wilson, the former frontrunner of Porcupine Tree and now a solo artist, a very established solo artist. So I'd like to hear from you guys. Mr. Wilson, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. And Steve, you're there as well?
Yes, I am. Glad to
This
meet
might get
you,
a little
Mr.
confusing
Wilson.
with all these Steves. Well, let's get down to it. Steve, I'm going to focus primarily on some audio questions for you. This is Gene here. Because of the nature of Audioholics, I'd like to talk to you about multi-channel audio because you are kind of leading the way. When it comes to progressive rock, man, I have to tell you, kudos to you for doing the multi-channel mixes you've been doing for so long.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So, some of the stuff I have for you here is your latest recording, the Hand Cannot Erase. Man, the audio on that Blu-ray is just amazing. The fidelity is top-notch. You have incredible dynamic range, excellent bass extension. Just wanted to know if you could share your thoughts on how you were able to do that, because, we're in an industry now where there's so much compression, and especially in modern music and rock and pop. And I just would like to know your thoughts on how you were able to preserve such great dynamic range and great multi-channel sound.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite simple for me, and I'm not suggesting this is the way for everyone, but for me personally, I do not have my mixes mastered. I do not allow any mastering engineer to touch my mixes once they are finished. Now, this is quite controversial because obviously, we live pretty much in the era when most people are expected when they finish a record to allow a mastering engineer to do the final, if you like, be the final arbiter before it goes out into the world. I got to the point a few years ago where I'd spent years getting stuff back from mastering engineers where they had, as you kind of pointed out, compressed, limited, reduced the dynamic range, usually messed about with the EQ in a way that I didn't particularly like. Usually they would add extra treble or extra bass. And I got to the point where I just thought, why am I allowing these people to mess up a mix that I was perfectly happy with when it came out of my studio? And so for the last few years, I've started to literally release what they call flat transfers of my mixes. So the mixes that you hear on my records, and this includes the stereo version on the CD, but also the high-res stereo and the 5.1 multi-channel mix. These are unmastered. The mixes are exactly as they came out of my studio, with all of the dynamic range preserved and exactly the EQ that I wanted when I mixed the tracks. Now, again, I'm not saying this is right for everyone, but this is definitely the way I decided was right for me.
Yeah, and it shows, man. When you have systems like my brother and I have that have incredible dynamic range and bass extension, you put one of your records on, and it's just it's a night and day difference compared to what's mostly done in the industry.
Yeah, and and I also figure that I think it is something specific to this kind of music. Whatever you want, you use the word prog rock, progressive rock. I'm not sure that's a word I particularly would use, but the idea anyway that this is music which is supposed to be taking the listener on some kind of musical journey across the space of an album. So it is like a kind of almost like a narrative to it. the people that listen to this kind of music do tend to want to engage with it at a deeper level anyway. This is not pop music. This is not stuff that you're just going to listen to in the background on the radio, you know. This is something you want to engage with, spend time with, and the most people that listen to this kind of music are prepared to accept music that has dynamics and has this sense of journey to it. So I think, particularly with this kind of music, the last thing you want to do is suck out all the dynamic range. And I've been very much of the opinion that we should preserve as much of it as possible.
Well, that's something we talk about all the time on our site, and we have YouTube videos and such. So you will be mentioned in the next one we do because, like I said, all the mixes you have here are just outstanding. And anybody that's into multi-channel audio should definitely get some of this.
Thank you.
So, the thing I wanted to ask you about your mixing is, what point of reference do you typically use? Do you mix from the band being all around the listener, or do you mix from the band being in front of the listener, and then you use the surround channels more for the ambient fill and for the little effects? What's your take on how multi-channel audio for music should be mixed?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and the way I can answer it is this: that I approached surround mixing, multi-channel mixing, really pretty much from the perspective of a fool. I didn't listen to anyone else's 5.1 mixes before I started to do this, with the one exception that I had one experience with a guy called Elliot Shiner who was employed to remix one of my old Porcupine Tree records into surround. And I sat there and I watched him do it. And I pretty much came away with the thought, you know what, this is something interesting. I could maybe do this. So I set myself up with the surround system at home. I didn't listen to any other surround mixes. I had no idea what people were doing. And I really approached it from the perspective of an idiot. What sounds good? And I started to just move things around the room, and I had like harmony backing vocals coming out of the rear speakers. If I had acoustic guitars, if I had 4 acoustic guitars, I would put one in each corner. All this stuff that seemed kind of obvious, intuitive to me. And then I discovered this is not what most people do. And I was realizing that people were getting very excited about my surround mixes because they saw them as more discreet, or at least more experimental, and more, making more use of the surround picture. And I realized that a lot of the surround mixes out there are, as you suggest, more just like a little bit of ambience in the back, but pretty much most of the band anchored in the front speakers. Well, that seems kind of boring to me, and I felt that surround was just an extension of the whole process of making a record. And when I make a record in the studio, I'm not thinking to myself, oh, I won't be able to play that live in that way, so I can't possibly do it in the studio. Quite the contrary, I'm looking at the studio as a way to take the music to a different place, and something maybe that could never be replicated in the live context. And I continued that philosophy through with surround. So, why not be experimental? Why not do stuff that could never really exist in the real world? And that for me is what making exciting surround experiences is about.
Yeah, it kind of, in a way, you're creating a new perspective as opposed to a live perspective. And in some ways, because if you have a high-end system, I would call it almost that better than being their experience, because you could actually reproduce music with higher fidelity in your home than you could when you go to a concert venue that's loaded with reverb and they're using giant line arrays of speakers.
Right.
And, it's just a whole different perspective I think people need to experience.
Yeah, I mean, the whole notion of a recorded version of music having somehow to be faithful to the live performance, I think is something, that we did away with in the 60s, when the Beatles started experimenting with, recording and the idea of pure recording, not recording for the sake of documenting a live performance, but actually using the studio as an instrument in its own right. Those are the kind of records I've grown up with, and 5.1 feeds perfectly into that kind of philosophy. You've now got 5 speakers you can move stuff around, and you've got 5 speakers you can create this incredibly immersive kind of world, in this kind of world of texture and dynamics. And for me, it's just an incredible joy to be able to create this whole three-dimensional, not necessarily realistic, but still really fascinating and really engaging world of music.
Gotcha. Hey, Steve, just to interrupt you real quick, sometimes your audio's dropping out. You might have to put the mic a little bit closer.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay. Yeah, those are great points. You know, as we're talking about, you said 5-channel mixes. I'm kind of curious, what kind of speaker arrangement do you have both in the studio and in your home? And do you use bass management in when you do these kind of mixes?
Okay, well, I'm using Genelec near-field monitors. You know, my studio is pretty small. I mean, I'm a great believer that you mix on a system that is as close as possible to the system that people are going to listen to the music on. So actually the system I have in my studio, I mean, they're great speakers, Genelec speakers, but the system I'm working on is not that far removed from the system that I listen to and the system I think that a lot of people at home are listening to. And that's important because everything sounds fantastic when it's listened to on incredible, you know, $10,000 speakers in some incredible, you know, commercial recording facility. But that's not the point. The point is to make something that's going to sound great in someone's domestic, you know, hi-fi setup. So I'm working with a fairly, I should say, modest system. And in terms of bass management, I usually tend to leave that up to, I have a couple of guys I use for authoring of my Blu-rays and DVDs, and I always let them make the final judgment, particularly as I'm not going through a mastering engineer. So I do rely on these guys to make the final judgment of how loud to have the LFE, the sub. And usually I tend to feed in the bass drum, the bass guitar, and that's pretty much it. So there's just a little bit more oomph on those particular, you know, pieces of audio information, but that's all.
Well, there's a reason why I asked you about bass management, and here's why. Years ago, I had the fortune of meeting some very famous recording engineers like Elliot Shiner, he's produced the Eagles, he's produced Steely Dan, and a lot of these guys, and this is no disrespect to them, but a lot of these guys were setting up their mixes from a single listening spot using 5 full-range speakers, and in some cases no subwoofers at all. And I tried to convey to these people that that's really not the ideal situation because nobody has 5 full-range towers to begin with. Number 2, when you put 5 bass sources in the room like that, they're usually not located in the right areas of the room to produce a flat, uniform bass. And number 3, setting up for a mix for a single sweet spot is just that, a single sweet spot. So it's really a compromise when you do something like that. It might sound good in a studio, but in a home environment, the results tend to be a mixed bag. So I was kind of curious about what your take was on that.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess the answer to that, I mean, that does come back to my point is that the system I'm working on is actually not that different to a domestic 5.1 listening system. So I believe I'm closer to the way that people are going to finally hear it in their living room. And I think that is important because, as you say, it's a very unrealistic scenario to mix under perfect, you know, commercial, high-end recording studio sort of, circumstances. So, you know what? I mean, it all comes back to what I said to you originally. I do what sounds good to me. I don't obey any rules because I never knew what the rules were to start with. I was the only guy I knew that was doing 5.1 sound. And apart from that one experience early on watching Elliot do a mix, which I wasn't crazy about anyway. I wasn't crazy about the way he mixed my record. In fact, part of my motivation for doing it is, you know what, I think I could do this better myself. And that was really how I approached it, just from the point of view of, you know, what sounds good to me. I don't care what the rules are. I don't care what you're supposed to and you're not supposed to do. This is what sounds good to me. And luckily, most of the people that listen to multi-channel music seem to have responded very positively to my take on it.
Yeah, definitely. Your multi-channel mixes have gotten better over time. You know, when I look at the first Porcupine Tree albums that you did in 5.1, like Dead Wing, and you know what?
That was Elliot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, those had like no bass.
Dead Wing was done by Elliot. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest with you, those are kind of hard to listen to on a very revealing system because they're just too biased forward and treble. Whereas your newer mixes have more dynamic range.
That's the album where that Elliot did that I thought, you know what, I think I could do this myself.
That's very interesting. That is very interesting. I'm glad we brought that up. Now, let me ask you this, Steve. I'm not sure how well versed you are with what's going on in the home theater industry, but are you aware of the new immersive surround formats like Dolby Atmos and DTS-X and Auro 3D?
Are these kind of pseudo surround things that take stereo and give you a surround effect on stereo?
No, not at all, Steve. What they are is it's called an object-oriented surround format, where what you're doing now with Dolby True HD and DTS HD is channel-based. So the idea of an object-based audio format is that you could place the sound in any place in space as opposed to tying it to a specific speaker location. Now, in order to do that, you're going to need to add height channels, and which is really impractical for most people. But I'm talking about upscale home theaters. What they would typically do is they would have a normal 5 or 7 channel speaker system, which is called the bed. That's the bed of the surround. That's usually at ear level.
Okay.
And then you would add 4 height channels.
Okay.
So now you create a bubble of surround sound, allegedly. And this is what the theory is. My question, I guess obviously you don't know much about it yet. My question was going to be is, are you planning on taking advantage of these new formats? And do you think it's really necessary? Because quite frankly, the benefit of it seems a little bit unclear at this time, since most people are placing their surround speakers above ear level and getting that elevated effect anyways. And most people can't do more than 5 speakers in a room, quite frankly.
Mm. Okay, I mean, as you can tell, I'm completely ignorant of this new development. I didn't know anything about it. Here's my initial thoughts. I think we're already at the absolute top end of what we can realistically expect the regular domestic customer to be doing in their home in terms of home entertainment listening. It's been a struggle to get a lot of people even to go to 5.1. And, with all the inherent problems that people have in the home, the shape of their room, the wife not liking the speakers in that place, all this stuff, it's been a struggle to get people to commit to 5.1. Are they going to go for something even more complex and even more elaborate? I would be very skeptical whether that would be anything other than a very, very small niche market. And then are we saying then that we need to remix the music again to take advantage of this setup, or is it something that it does with an existing 5.1 mix? Sorry, I'm not quite clear on that.
Well, there's two ways. Number one, you could do the upsampler that these programs have, like Dolby has a Dolby upsampler, so it could take a regular 5.1 and bring it to 5.1.4. Mm-hmm. But what I've found with these upsamplers is it's a mixed bag. It's like throwing Pro Logic 2 at a 2-channel source. It could sound good or it could sound mediocre. It really depends on the recording. So that's one way of doing it. And quite frankly, I tend to not use that. I tend to just use the pure 5-channel mix. But then, yes, like you said, the only way to get the discrete benefits of the format is to remix. Not only that, but with Dolby, you have to actually pay a licensing fee for Atmos, whereas DTS is open tool. It's free for you to get their technology. So that's going to be a tough pill to swallow, to get recording studios to reinvest in new equipment.
Well, and I can tell you what's going to be even harder is to convince record companies to have the work remixed yet again into another format. I mean, what's been really encouraging over the last 4 or 5 years is to see the amount of catalog that has begun to come out in 5.1 surround sound, and I've been very happy to be a big part of that, remixing various classic back catalogs has been something I've really enjoyed doing over the last few years. But I can tell you that the budgets for doing this that are coming from record companies are pitifully small. And the only reason that a lot of these catalogs exist, whether it's the Jethro Tull catalog or the Yes catalog or the XTC catalog or the Roxy Music catalog, the only reason they exist in 5.1 is because I'm a fan. And I don't mind if they come to me with these pitifully small budgets, because they don't have a lot of money for these projects anymore. Now, if you're asking record companies to go back and say remix these albums yet again in another format, I think they're just going to throw their hands up with horror. It's been tough enough to get them to embrace Blu-ray. It's been tough enough to get them to embrace 5.1. They have, reluctantly and slowly. So I'm not sure what catalog is actually out there in this new format right now, if you don't mind me asking.
Zero. It's all for movies, and now we have about a handful of movies. Some of them are pretty pitiful, like Transformers. That's what they're giving us on the new format. But
well, that says it all really to me. I mean, I think, multi-channel sound has always been very much driven by the cinema industry anyway.
Correct.
I can't honestly see this catching on in the pure audio industry. It's the market will never be there. It's too expensive. So that would be my initial reaction to this.
Great. Well, I do want to thank you for the King Crimson mixes in 5.1. They're just stellar. Red, for example, just kicks some serious ass, man. It really does. And
thank you.
Yeah. I have a smile on my face every time I put that on. One last thing I wanted to just mention to you, if you can, like in future concerts that you mix. For example, when I listened to Porcupine Tree, the blue one, what was that one called? Anesthetize, that tour that you mixed on Blu-ray?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of tracks on there where you're singing and you don't mix to the center channel and you can barely hear yourself singing. So I would beg and plead to you in future mixes, please try to use that center channel more for the dialogue so we can really hear the voices.
Well, I had a problem with mixing vocal into center channel for live stuff. Which is the amount of, obviously, as you understand, when you're recording a live show and the center microphone is picking up a lot of everything else going on stage. And that was the problem I had. There was so much leakage on that microphone that putting it in the center speaker created all sorts of phase issues with the audio that was leaking from the rest of the band in the center speaker. I won't bore you with the technical details, but there was a very specific reason why I didn't feel I could mix the lead vocal into the center channel on that particular project. But
that's
I do
fair
appreciate
enough.
what you're saying, and I think it is a sort of project by project basis, to review what's possible, really.
Excellent. I'm gonna lead you over to my brother so he could ask you the band questions. But one last thing I wanted to tell you, I had to do this for my daughters. I have a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old daughters. That they're both big fans of your work with Porcupine Tree, and my oldest daughter is a classically trained piano student, and she transposes a lot of those songs to piano, and it's beautiful to see kids listening to your kind of music, man. I just wanted to let you know that.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing,
Yeah. So, Steve, I'm going to turn you over to my brother, Steve Della Sala, and he's going to ask you some questions, okay?
Yeah, hello,
okay,
Mr.
cool.
Wilson. I want you to put on your musician hat and feel free to talk as tech as possible on that subject. But one of the questions I have before we get into Hand Cannot Erase, your music tends to have a very dark edge to it. And I'm wondering not only what motivates you to get that dark edge, but how do you accomplish it and achieve it musically? Is it through key signatures or how does it come about?
Well, it's a difficult thing to analyze because, in a way, you're asking me to analyze my personality. I mean, this is not something terribly conscious. When I create music, of course, I'm drawing on many things. I'm drawing on my whole life. I'm drawing on my experience. I'm drawing on the music I love, the movies I love, the books I love. So my perspective, is in musical perspective, is very much a reflection of my life, my personality. You know what? I don't think it's unusual to look around the world that we live in and come away with a relatively negative kind of view of it. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world, without stating the obvious, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world that is not good and can lead you to have a fairly melancholic view of, shall we say, the gift of life. And music for me always is a cathartic experience. So I don't tend to write about things that make me happy. I don't tend to write music when I'm happy at all. I tend to write music and lyrics when I feel something is making me angry, something is making me sad, something is depressing me, something is distressing me. And so I suppose in that sense the music does have that side of my personality much more than it has, say, the joyous side of my musical personality. But I'm also someone that believes that there's a lot of beauty in melancholia, and there's a lot of beauty in reflecting, shall we say, the human condition in both negative and positive senses. There's beauty in loss, there's beauty in regret, there's beauty in nostalgia, there's beauty in sadness. And I think my music does tap into that kind of concept quite a lot, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I wanted to ask about, start talking a little bit about the new release, which, by the way, I absolutely love. I watched the Hand Cannot Erase on Blu-ray, basically the entire thing. So, what I admire about it is that the listener has an opportunity to experience the story through the photos and the artwork. I already know what the story is, so you don't need to rehash that because you made it clear in the movie portion of it. But just give us an idea on how it all came together, where you got the artwork and you try to put the pictures down to just take people through the way this woman basically grew up in this apartment. She went from being young, she went to getting older and getting tattoos, then she went to smoking cigarettes. I mean, it's an evolution of somebody's life in an apartment, and all the artwork that goes along with that. How did you get that all together?
Well, so it was originally inspired by a true life story of a woman called Joyce Carol Vincent, who was found dead in her apartment in North London, and her body had been there undiscovered for more than 2 years. And that's such a shocking, of course, that's a very, very shocking thing. But what became fascinating to me about that were not the circumstances of her death, but the circumstances of her life that could lead to such a situation occurring. How could someone disappear so completely? And how could someone that was young and attractive and popular disappear so completely? So my character is a fictional character. She is based on Joyce Carol Vincent, but she is a fictional character. She has a lot of my thoughts, and she has a lot of my autobiography in her. Of course she does. And it really became, for me, a journey. It was a journey from childhood to growing up to moving to the city and to essentially disappearing or erasing herself from the world. And the kind of motivation to want to do that, looking at the world that we live in and how, in fact, easy it is to do that, particularly if you live in the heart of a major city these days. It's very easy to be invisible, I think. And if you think about it, the only way to tell a story like that really is with some kind of internal dialogue, because this is a character that has little or no interaction with the outside world at all. So the only real way to tell her story was through some kind of diary or some kind of blog or some kind of photo journal. And once I started thinking in that way, it presented this wonderful opportunity to have this almost like scrapbook presentation style with the artwork, where you had everything from painting, photography, childhood pictures, diary entries, blog entries, letters, postcards, Polaroids. Anything you could kind of associate with a life could be a part of this document. So it became a real gift from that point of view in terms of visual kind of conceptualization, visual representation, and I'm really, really pleased with the way it came out. It was a lot of hard work, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, it definitely shows, and like I said, it really takes the listener to a journey. So I would encourage anybody that actually listens to the Blu-ray to actually watch it as well. I sat there mesmerized on all the songs. On that note, or while we're talking about the album, the lead guitar on this particular release from previous releases, I think, is much more diverse, and there's some amazing guitar leads on that. There tends to be a little bit cleaner and less distortion and a lot more melodic leads on it. So I'm just wondering if you can give us an idea of what inspired that.
I think, everything really comes from the story, and the musical palette that is used on any of my records starts with the story. Now, my previous solo record, The Raven Refused to Sing, was based on this idea of almost like classical Gothic ghost stories. So it had an almost kind of vintage approach to reflect that kind of storytelling. This time around, this is a story very much set in the modern world. It's set in the city. It's set in the 21st century. And the musical palette kind of reflects that. I can't be specific about why I would have chosen a particular guitar tone, but the musical world, the musical palette, the kind of musical colors that I'm using seem to be the ones that made the most sense. Maybe something as simple as the fact that this is a female character, and I wanted a more almost a more feminine tone, a more feminine sound in certain places, perhaps less aggressive, to reflect the fact that this is a female character.
Ah, that's a good point. Excellent. I also like the electronic percussion in this release. There's some really catchy patterns that you've come up with, and just kind of curious how you get those patterns in your head and transcribe them and build them into the song where the drums kick in and it just becomes this enormous sound stage. And it's a lot of the songs are built off of just a catchy electronic percussion pattern.
Well, again, it's not something really conscious. I mean, it is intuitive in the sense that my musical tastes are very diverse. I listen to a lot of electronic music. I listen to a lot of rock music. I listen to a lot of jazz music. I listen to a lot of pop music. So when I'm writing, the albums and I'm creating the music, I'm not sort of sitting down and saying in a rather self-conscious way, you know what, let's have 20% jazz, 30% rock, 20% pop, etc., etc. The point I'm making is that actually the music just literally comes in a very organic, natural way, and I'm not necessarily conscious of using electronic music versus, say, acoustic music or organic music. But I guess I've always loved, picking up on something you said, I've always loved the sense of drama that you can get in building pieces from, fairly small forces to begin with to massive epic forces on, at the end of the song. I mean, there's some songs on this record that end, start with an acoustic guitar and end with a choir and an orchestra and a whole rock and roll band. And I love that sense of drama, and I love that sense of dynamic, and you'll find that kind of shot through all of my music, I think.
Excellent. So a while back, I remember it was either in an interview or something, but you were going to have your own Mellotron built, and I'm just wondering, did that happen? And can you tell us about it?
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah, I did, yes. No, I took delivery in January last year of a Mellotron M4000, brand new Mellotron. It had taken them about a year and a half to make it for me, and it's all over this new record. It's all over this new record. It's my pride and joy.
Well, what's different about this one? I mean, it took a year and a half to make. Is there something special about it that gave it a signature for Steve Wilson?
Well, it's based on the original M400, if you know much about the history of Mellotron. It's based on the M400, so it's made by the same company that made the M400, Streetly Electronics. They're still around. And they make about 12 Mellotrons a year, because they are beautiful, intricate pieces of machinery. What's different about the M4000 is it's a bit more reliable in terms of it doesn't respond to power fluctuations and things like the old one did. And it also enables you to have access to, how many, let me think, 20, I can have 24 sounds simultaneously available to me without having to change the tape frame. So on the old Mellotron you could only have 3 sounds at any one time, and if you wanted to have different sounds, you literally had to remove the tapes and put in another tape frame. So they've expanded and improved the technology to allow you to have 8 tape frames simultaneously loaded into the Mellotron. So it's a lot more practical as regards changing from sound to sound.
Nice. Well, it definitely showed in the new CD, and I love the sound of it. So a lot of times we also do product reviews, so I wanted to, on various different things for Pro Audio. So one of my favorite questions to ask musicians, and I'm sure you might have answered this before, but it would be a good spin on this blog that we're doing to the podcast that we're doing to hear it again. But what is on your pedal board and why?
On my pedal board for live work?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I use a gig rig. Do you know the British company Gig Rig?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm using their latest pedal board, and I'm using the Strymon delay and the Strymon reverb. So that's the Big Sky and the I always forget the name, Time Machine for my delays and reverbs. What else have I got in there? God, I can never remember.
I thought I saw an Electro-Harmonix POG or something like that in the background.
Yes, I have got one of them. I use that for my lower octave stuff. You know what? I've got to go to soundcheck now, so I'm going to actually walk to the stage, and that'll help me to answer your question, in fact, as well. stage.
So you do
Where is
use
the
the
stage?
you do use the POG to bring out some of the to do some octave generating.
Yes. So I'm using the POG to create a lower octave. So to get like
the
a
lower
really
octave,
nice lower heavy tone. I'm just going to the stage now, so I'll be able to tell you even more in a minute.
We have time for a couple more questions, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Okay, not a problem.
I've got to go to sound check, buddy. I'm really sorry.
No worries,
Okay.
man. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Steve.
Nice to speak to you. Have a great day.
Bye.
You too.
So, Hugo, what did you think about that interview, man?
Man, that was something else. He was throwing all sorts of information at us.
You know, a couple of things that really stood out to me is I got into this conversation about how most music today is so compressed,
Yeah.
lacking dynamics, and he immediately understood that. And what did he say? He doesn't let engineers touch the masters.
That's it. You know, he doesn't want that to be touched because it's going to increase compression. It's going to go ahead and change the way that the music is supposed to be heard.
Yeah, and you know, I like the fact that he basically said that he doesn't follow any rules because he doesn't know the rules. He kind of makes his own. And, you know, that's kind of like us.
It's like us, you know, he goes by the end result, and then that's it. You know, does it sound good? That's the main question. Is the fidelity high? Those are the questions that need to be asked. And I think, Gene, you know, he raises some solid points. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, they get stuck into the, you know, the rules and what to do and what not to do, and they forget about the fact that the bottom line is, how is it sounding? You know? And that's the ticket.
And I think what's really interesting is the fact that I brought up some key points to him about their early, back when he was in the Porcupine Tree days, the first two mixes that he did in 5.1, In Absentia and Deadwing, great albums, but quite frankly, they were lacking in fidelity in the mix. They were very bright sounding, kind of compressed sounding. And I didn't even know at the time that he had Mr. Elliot Shiner produce those records for him, the mixes for him. Then he decided, you know what, he could do it better.
Yeah.
He could do it his way. And then now we have incredible mixes here. All of his solo work, the Steve Wilson stuff, is just sounds fantastic. The bass, you know, just the dynamics. If you have a really good setup, you will be in for a treat if you listen to this music. Now, and I also love the fact that he's into understanding about bass management, about using good speakers. You don't have to go out and get, you know, super expensive speakers. He does his mixes on Genlex, which are very respected speakers in the industry. They're not overpriced. There's no snake oil in them. They're not firing drivers up at the ceilings to do an Atmos effect. You know, they're just giving you direct sound, high quality sound, and based on proven science.
Exactly.
And that's what it is. That's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Exactly. One of the things that I really enjoyed, Gene, is his thoughts about, you know, 2-channel audio and 5-channel audio. You know?
Yeah.
That was really, really interesting because these are the kind of things that we have been saying all along, you know, in terms of like increasing, you know, the amount of speakers in a room and things like that.
Yeah, he said it's a tough sell to basically go to 5.1, let alone going beyond 5.1. And what I thought was really interesting is when I talked about the next immersive surround formats like Atmos, Oro, and DTSX, he didn't even know what they were.
I know.
And then when I explained to him what they were, he's like, nah, that's never going to fly, not in the music industry. You know, there's no budget.
No budget. That's it. That's the interesting part. There's no budget.
No budget in redoing the mixes.
Well, you have that problem, and then at the consumer problem, you know, the budgets are limited too because we have a very small percentage of people that have the budget to have a room like this one.
Right.
Okay, this is a tiny percentage of people that do that, and then you know you have to convince people to add more speakers. When in reality, you know, to have a 5.1 system already is a huge thing. You know.
Yeah, and like we said before, you get a good recording like Mr. Steve Wilson stuff here, and you put it on 5 or 7 very high quality speakers and a couple of subs. I'm telling you, man, you're in another world. You don't need to have any whiz-bang effects for that.
The other thing that I really loved about the interview is how he uses the studio. That was interesting.
As an instrument.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that because I asked him, I go, how do you do your mixes? Do you do it from the perspective where the band is in front of the stage, or do you do it from where the band is around you? And he's like, you know what? I don't do it like it's a mix for when you're at a concert. If you want to hear a mix at a concert, go to the concert.
Exactly.
He's actually given, in my opinion, that better than being there experience because he's given you this incredible mix that's unique for the album, okay? and it's unique for your speaker layout, so you can really take a benefit from having all the speakers around you and hearing, you know, you could have a guitar in this channel, or you could have a drum, or, you know, whatever effect you want. He doesn't do it gimmicky. He's not like doing it like the old Beatles records where you had the voices coming out of the left speaker and the guitar coming out of the right speaker. He's doing a very tasteful mix in his Blu-ray discs over here.
Honestly, I'm a big fan, man. I'm a big fan. I love the fact that he understands so well the subject of mixing, and, you know, the fidelity, and I think he just takes his music to another level. It
really does, and it's a story. Like his latest album, Ham Cannot Erase, I mean, it's a whole story about this woman that lived in an apartment, growing up in the apartment. She dies and is not discovered for 3 years that she's dead, and it's a story that caught his interest in the media, and he actually made a whole album based around it. And I think that was a really interesting concept. The artwork in it is great, and again, the surround mix.
Yeah, incredible. Incredible. I love that. I think we name him a fellow Audioholics.
He definitely is an Audioholic. In fact, we got to send him an Audioholic shirt to wear in Pride.
He really does. It's incredible, too. You could hear the passion of the subject matter when he was talking to us, you know?
Oh, yeah.
To be honest with you, and this is my personal opinion, right? I think that at the beginning of the interview, he was probably expecting the typical interview, you know, where none of these questions are ever asked, okay? Right. And he was in for a surprise, a pleasant surprise, when you started asking some solid questions on how you mix your stuff, what you think of this, what you think of that. Very knowledgeable guy. Very, very knowledgeable.
We're all about advancing good sound, and whether it's 2-channel or multi-channel. And, you know, and he offers it in vinyl if you want to just do a 2-channel mix, or he does it in 5.1. And I'm excited because it's very rare to get mainstream music. I wouldn't even consider this mainstream. In fact, what's funny about that is I said prog rock. He's like, oh, we're not progressive rock. I find that interesting that not only does Porcupine Tree and Steve Wilson, and even when I interviewed Marillion, they're all distancing themselves from the term prog rock or progressive rock. I find that a little disappointing because, quite frankly, and this is my opinion, that's some of my favorite music that's ever been made in the 70s and 80s, early 80s. But I can understand why they don't want to be labeled as prog rock, because it died in the 80s and it's a bad stigma. So... But in reality, let's face it, it's progressive rock. I mean, he's progressing it. He's changing the sound. He's redefining new sounds. He's combining jazz. He's combining heavy metal. He's combining rock. He's combining pop. If you listen to his mixes, they're very well produced. I mean, he's got like elements of ABBA in his mixes. You know, it's not just, you can't really define his music into one category. So in my opinion, I call it prog rock. Hope I don't offend you, Mr. Wilson, but you are the prog rock king right now.
Yeah, this is just taking it to a whole nother level, to where no man has gone before.
Yes. So we thank you guys for listening, and it was a great honor to interview Steve Wilson. I've been listening to his music since we were in college. I mean, back in the day, I used to put the speakers out the window at the apartment complex.
I know, I remember.
We'd be, you know, hanging out
at the pool.
We'd be blasting Porcupine Tree. Yeah. Signify or die.
Yeah. We shared the music with everybody.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Whether they wanted to hear it or not.
Yes. Awesome, Gene. Well, on that note, I'll just invite our people to just go ahead and subscribe to our channel and just let us know what they think on the comments below. And if they like this video, click thumbs up and share it with your friends.
Excellent.
Until next time, keep listening.